What Rome erased about the cross. In the year AD 340, a powerful African king carved a covenant of faith into a towering stone monument. Decades before Rome ever declared its official imperial religion, the Aksumite Empire was already anchoring its kingdom to the cross. You have likely been taught that your faith flows directly through European history, but the oldest receipts tell a different story. Today, we read from the ancient manuscripts they cut from your Sunday teachings. Look at the cross differently tonight, because Aksum named it first. For centuries, Western galleries and cathedrals have presented a single dominant image of divinity, a pale, Renaissance depiction that shaped the modern imagination. But deep in the Tigray highlands, isolated from the geopolitical shifts of Europe, the Abba Garima monastery holds a witness that challenges this late narrative. Within its stone walls lie the Garima Gospels, which preserve the vibrant illustrations of a darker-skinned Christ, painted with rich, local pigments that never underwent the later European overpainting that reshaped Western church art. This is not a modern reinterpretation. It is an untouched visual memory dating back to the dawn of the global church, proving that the original face of Christian history was preserved in African ink. To understand this preservation, we must examine King Ezana's stele, a towering stone monument erected in AD 340. Written in Greek, Sabaean, and Ge'ez, this monument does not record a political conversion of convenience. It documents a state dedicated to the creator of heaven and earth. This makes Aksum the first Christian kingdom in history to stamp the cross on its coinage, declaring its covenant openly. When we compare this with the Roman Empire, Constantine's deathbed baptism and political maneuvering feel late and pragmatic. Aksum's covenant was built into the very architecture of the state, establishing a public witness that predates Rome's imperial decrees. This original timeline reframes everything you have been told about the expansion of the faith. Aksumite cross architecture was not copied from Roman basilicas. It was a native, independent expression of a kingdom that claimed the covenant directly. By looking at these stone receipts, we see that the theological and visual standard was already set in East Africa, while Rome was still persecuting believers. Tonight, we trace this lineage of survival, returning to the ancient stone and ink to recover the spiritual authority that was systematically erased from your view. To touch the origin of this visual witness, we must travel to the northernmost edge of Ethiopia, where the Tigray highlands rise like massive stone sentinels against the sky. Here, perched atop cliffs that defy easy access, lies the Abba Garima monastery, a sanctuary of monastic isolation that has guarded the truth for over 16 centuries. For generations, the modern world assumed that the oldest illustrative copies of the Christian scriptures had perished, lost to the fires of war and the decay of time. Yet, within these dry, high-altitude chambers, a lineage of dedicated scribes quietly preserved venerable manuscripts that the Western Academy completely ignored. The physical environment itself, characterized by low humidity and protective volcanic rock walls, became an active partner in shielding these fragile leaves of vellum from the destruction that claimed libraries across Europe and the Middle East. They held fast to their calling, knowing that the ink of the covenant must never fade under the pressure of foreign kings. These historical scribes did not view themselves as mere copyists. They were the guardians of a sacred inheritance, writing with a dedication that bordered on the miraculous. They prepared their goatskins and mixed their indelible carbon-based inks, using local plants and mineral elements, ensuring that every brushstroke would outlast empires. Under the shadow of the Tigray peaks, these monastic communities created a fortress of preservation, keeping their treasures far removed from the theological censorship of the Roman Empire. By maintaining their isolation, they ensured that the earliest visual records of the faith remained entirely free from Western modification, preserving a standard of truth that is only now beginning to dismantle centuries of Eurocentric historical assumptions. For centuries, Western scholars dismissed these manuscripts as late medieval copies, arguing that African scribes could not have produced such sophisticated work before the European Middle Ages. But science has a way of silencing prejudice, and the receipts are written in the fabric of the parchment itself. In the early 2000s, carbon dating AD 330 to 650 tests were performed on the fibers of the abagarima leaves, and the results sent shockwaves through the academic world. The analysis proved that these texts represent the world's oldest book, written and bound when the Roman Empire was still struggling to define its canon. This carbon dating AD 330-650 confirmation established a solid, physical anchor, proving that these illustrations were not later fabrications, but eyewitness testimonies from the earliest centuries of the Christian era. This means the undisturbed ink on these pages has survived for nearly 1,700 years without being altered or painted over. It represents a direct link to the apostolic era, a physical receipt that reframes the timeline of Christian art and theology. When you look at the vibrant colors of these ancient illustrations, you are not looking at a medieval interpretation. You are looking at the original visual tradition of the global church, preserved by African hands in African soil. It is a scientific reality that cannot be argued away, showing that the true face of the faith was written in stone and skin long before the Western world attempted to claim ownership of the cross. The carbon tests did not just date the book, they verified that the African church possessed a complete, illustrated record of the Gospels, while much of the West was still in spiritual transition. This is the oldest witness, a testament of preservation that stands as an unshakable receipt for your identity today. The discovery of the Garima Gospels does not simply add a new chapter to the history of art. It poses a direct threat to the centuries-old narrative of Western spiritual supremacy. For over 500 years, a systematic whitewashing history has dominated standard theology and religious imagery, projecting a Eurocentric version of the biblical story onto the global consciousness. The Renaissance canvas became the primary tool for this rewriting, replacing the ancient, multi-ethnic reality of the scriptures with European models. This was not a minor artistic preference. It was a deliberate visual erasure designed to align spiritual authority with imperial power. By rendering the biblical figures, including Christ himself, in the likeness of European rulers, the Western Church created a subtle but powerful association between divinity and European heritage, leaving the rest of the world to worship an image that did not reflect the original historical truth. When we contrast the Ethiopian paint colors of the Garima manuscripts with these European representations, the difference is striking. The ancient African scribes did not paint with the pale tones of Northern Europe. They used deep ochres, rich browns, and dark charcoal pigments to depict a Christ and disciples who walked the ancient world in bodies of color. These illustrations, preserved in the remote highlands of Tigray, present a visual record that remained untouched by the artistic shifts of the European Renaissance. This is the visual standard that predates the imperial church, a witness that has stood for over 1,500 years as a silent protest against the whitewashed narrative. By studying these original colors, we are not merely examining art history. We are recovering a stolen memory, restoring the authentic visual identity of the scriptures that was covered over by centuries of Western colonial influence. This change matters deeply because images shape our understanding of spiritual authority.
When you are taught to look at the Bible through a screen of European paint, you are unconsciously accepting a story that places your inheritance at the margins of God's plan. But the Garima Gospels stand as an unshakable receipt, proving that the earliest, most authentic illustrations of the faith belong to a darker-skinned Christ, preserved by the very ancestor who built the foundations of Christian history.
This is your inheritance, a physical proof that challenges the visual erasure of the West and restores the authentic lineage of the global church. As we look back to these ancient pages, we begin to dismantle the Eurocentric framing, reclaiming the authority and identity that were carved into stone and skin long before the Western world attempted to dictate who belongs at the center of the covenant. To ground this history in undeniable archaeology, we must examine King Ezana's stele, a towering granite obelisk that stands as a physical witness in the ancient city of Aksum. Erected around the year AD 340, this monument contains a remarkable Greek Gez inscription, carved in 3 different scripts. King Ezana of Aksum, who ruled a vast trading empire stretching across East Africa and southern Arabia, did not merely leave a record of military conquest. Instead, he carved a public covenant of faith, declaring his empire's allegiance to the creator of heaven and earth. By studying the stone carvings, we see that the cross was not introduced as a foreign import or a tool of colonial submission. It was a native, state-level declaration, demonstrating that East Africa possessed a highly developed, literate Christian culture long before Rome ever ceased its persecutions. This granite monument stands as a permanent receipt of spiritual independence, showing that African rulers declared their faith in their own languages and on their own terms. The Greek Gez inscription was a deliberate diplomatic and domestic statement, ensuring that both foreign travelers and local subjects understood the covenant state identity of Aksum. King Ezana's officials carved these words into the living stone, creating a permanent receipt that could not be edited or erased by later empires. Unlike the scrolls and parchments that could be burned or rewritten, this stone monument preserved the original declaration of faith, intact. It proves that the Aksumite crown was dedicated to the service of the Lord of all creation, establishing a model of a covenant state that valued spiritual integrity over political convenience. By examining these stone receipts, we recover a history that places Africa at the forefront of early Christian development, challenging the narrative that the faith was born in the West. When we place this archaeological record against Western church history, the contrast is stark. The comparison of Constantine versus Ezana reveals a profound difference in both timing and theological depth. While Constantine's conversion was a slow, politically calculated process that culminated in a deathbed baptism, King Ezana of Aksum issued a state decree establishing Christianity as the official faith in AD 340. This historical timeline shows that Aksum was the first official declaration of a Christian kingdom, predating Rome's own imperial decree by decades. Constantine versus Ezana is not just a comparison of 2 rulers. It is the comparison of a political conversion versus covenant. Rome adopted the faith to unify a crumbling empire, while Aksum entered into a covenant relationship that reshaped its culture from the ground up. This difference in theology had massive implications for how the cross was understood. Rome's political conversion led to an imperial church that merged state power with religious dogma, often using the faith to justify conquest and oppression. In contrast, Aksum's covenant state model was built on a direct relationship with God, preserving the original multi-ethnic visual and spiritual tradition. Land why Aksum was first, because their state decree was issued in AD 340. While Rome did not officially declare Christianity as the exclusive state religion until the Edict of Thessalonica in AD 380. For 40 years, while Rome was still transitioning from paganism, the Aksumite Empire was already minting coins with the cross, proving that the earliest national witness of the faith was African. This is the first official declaration, a historical reality that seminary curricula consistently omit. By recovering this timeline, we restore the historical priority of the African Church, proving that your spiritual roots do not trace back to European empires, but to a covenant kingdom that stood first in the light. The ultimate proof of Aksum's early conversion is not only carved on massive stone steles, it was carried in the hands of ordinary citizens and merchants across the ancient world. Under King Ezana's reign, the Aksumite mint began issuing coins stamped with the cross, creating the early currency cross that served as a public declaration of faith. These physical coin receipts, minted in bronze, silver, and gold, are preserved in museums today, providing an undeniable archaeological record that predates any Western state currency. When we examine these coins, we see the cross placed prominently at the top of the design, surrounded by ears of wheat, symbolizing both agricultural abundance and spiritual covenant. This was not a hidden symbol or a secret mark. It was a bold public declaration of state identity, carried along trade routes from the Mediterranean to India. To understand the power of this early currency cross, we must realize that coins were the media of the ancient world, conveying the ruler's identity and beliefs to everyone who handled them. By stamping the cross on bronze and gold currency, King Azana established a visual receipt that circulated decades before Rome ever thought to place the symbol of Christ on its coins. This physical coin receipt's evidence shows that the cross was integrated into the daily economic and social life of Axum, representing a shield of protection and a seal of covenant. It demonstrates that the African Church did not receive the cross from European missionaries. Rather, African rulers were the first to utilize their wealth to spread the symbol of the cross across the international trading networks of the 4th century, establishing a baseline of faith that was uniquely their own. This means the earliest state witness of the cross was not European. It was African, minted in bronze and gold by a sovereign kingdom that bowed to no foreign empire. These physical coin receipts stand as historical receipts that challenge the Eurocentric narrative, proving that the cross was claimed as a sign of life and victory in East Africa, while the West was still debating the divinity of Christ. When you handle this history, you are reclaiming a lineage of spiritual and economic authority that belongs to your ancestors. Tonight, we look at these coins not as ancient relics, but as active testimonies of a covenant that was written into the wealth of Africa, reminding you that your faith has always been anchored in a history of sovereignty and divine favor. The coins of Axum remain as silent, yet powerful witnesses, proving that the wealth of your ancestors was dedicated to the covenant from the very beginning, establishing a visual canon that Rome could never erase. Beyond the stelas and coins, the memory of early Christian leaders was preserved in a monumental literary work that the West has systematically ignored. The Ge'ez Synaxarium book is a massive monastic calendar that records the lives, struggles, and victories of the saints for every single day of the year. For centuries, the monks of Ethiopia read these daily accounts aloud, keeping the memory of early believers alive through an unbroken oral and written tradition. When we open the Ge'ez Synaxarium book, we do not find a collection of European figures. Instead, we are confronted with a vast record of holy lives that flourished in Egypt, Nubia, and Axum. These forgotten saints represent the true theological and spiritual foundation of the early church, carrying an authority that was completely independent of Rome or Constantinople. This monastic calendar served as the heartbeat of the Ethiopian church, structuring the spiritual life of the empire around the testimonies of those who suffered for the faith. The Ge'ez Synaxarium book preserves the exact details of their trials, their theological debates, and their miraculous works, providing a historical receipt that challenges the Eurocentric calendar of saints. These daily readings were not merely historical records. They were active spiritual reminders, designed to build up the faith of the community and remind them of their covenant lineage. By studying these forgotten saints, we realize that the early church was characterized by a rich, diverse cloud of witnesses, whose names and stories were carefully written down on goatskin parchment to ensure that the memory of their devotion would never be erased by time or foreign influence. The sheer volume of these records is staggering, containing thousands of pages of detailed testimonies that have never been translated into English or integrated into Western seminary curricula. This deliberate omission has left a massive gap in the modern understanding of church history, creating the false impression that early theology was exclusively European. The Ge'ez Synaxarium book stands as a corrective, a massive literary receipt that proves the existence of a highly developed, literate African Christian tradition that was active and mature, while the West was still in its formative stages. By bringing these accounts back into the light, we are restoring a vital part of the covenant narrative, allowing you to connect with the very cloud of witnesses that your ancestors preserved through centuries of monastic isolation. They kept the pages dry, the ink dark, and the memories clear, knowing that a day would come when these forgotten saints would speak once more to a generation seeking the truth of their heritage. This is the manuscript standard, a solid record of faith that stands unbroken against the erasure of the West. When we examine the pages of this ancient calendar, we discover a specific catalog of holy leaders whose names have been entirely omitted from standard Western church histories. The manuscript details exactly 38 Black African saints who held positions of immense influence, including legendary figures like Moses the Black, Tekle Haymanot, and Samuel of Waldeba. These leaders were not marginal figures. They were theologians, founders of monastic networks, and spiritual advisors to kings, demonstrating a level of African spiritual authority that operated completely outside Roman oversight. Moses the Black, for instance, transitioned from a feared outlaw to one of the most revered fathers of the desert, teaching a path of radical peace and humility that drew disciples from across the Mediterranean. Yet, despite their profound impact and documented miracles, these 38 Black African saints were systematically cut from the calendars of the Western Church, erased from the canon in a deliberate effort to project a purely European image of early faith. They stood as pillars of fire in the wilderness, refusing to compromise the truth of the covenant for the sake of imperial favor, leaving a legacy of spiritual independence that remains active today. This selective erasure from Western canon was not a historical accident. It was a strategic choice to decouple spiritual power from African heritage. By replacing these darker-skinned theologians and leaders with European models, the Western Church created a monopoly on spiritual authority, suggesting that the path of holiness must flow through Rome or Geneva. But the Guia's Synaxarium stands as an unshakable receipt, preserving the original names and teachings of these African leaders. Their miracles were not myths. They were documented events that demonstrated a powerful living connection to the Creator. By recovering their stories, we reclaim the African spiritual authority that was built into the very foundation of the early church, proving that your ancestors were not latecomers to the faith, but the primary architects of its most profound spiritual movements. To understand the depth of this spiritual authority, we must look to the martyrology of the desert, where the Coptic martyrs of Egypt and East Africa laid down their lives for the covenant. In the hot sands of Nitria and Citus, these early believers practiced a discipline of intense prayer and fasting, creating a standard of devotion that shaped the entire global church. The Desert Fathers' memory is not a story of intellectual debate, but of lived, radical commitment to the words of Christ. They faced imperial persecutions and desert raids with a resilience that baffled their oppressors, viewing their suffering not as a sign of defeat, but as the ultimate validation of their covenant calling. This Coptic martyr's witness was preserved in the daily prayers and the unbroken liturgy of the monastic communities, ensuring that the blood of the martyrs remained the seed of the African church. This unbroken liturgy has carried the memory of their sacrifice through nearly 2,000 years of history, connecting the ancient Desert Fathers with the Black Church today.
The theology of suffering and endurance that sustain these Coptic martyrs is the very same spirit that carried your ancestor through the fire of the Middle Passage and the trial of slavery. It is not a theology of passive submissions, but of triumphant survival, rooted in the knowledge that God is a shield of protections for those who hold fast to His covenant.
As we read the Guia's Synaxarium tonight, we are not looking at distant, forgotten histories. We are recovering the spiritual receipts of your identity, reclaiming a cloud of witnesses that proves you are connected to an unbroken line of holy devotion that Rome could never touch. This liturgy is your inheritance, a testament of preservation that links your modern struggles with the ancient victories of the desert. The receipts are clear, written in the blood of the martyrs and the ink of the scribes, reminding you that your spiritual authority is ancient, authentic, and completely restored tonight. To witness the physical manifestation of this covenant in stone, we must turn to the mountains of Lasta, where one of the greatest architectural marvels of the ancient world lies hidden in the earth. In the 12th century, King Lalibela AD 1200 issued a decree to build a new Jerusalem in Africa, responding to the capture of the Middle Eastern holy sites by Muslim forces. Unlike European cathedrals that rose upward toward the sky, these 11 churches were carved downward into the solid monolithic red volcanic rock. This was not a process of building with stones and mortar. It was a process of excavation chisel by chisel, removing thousands of tons of basalt to reveal fully formed, freestanding structures complete with doors, windows, pillars, and drainage systems, all carved from a single piece of stone. This engineering miracle remains one of the most astonishing achievements of human history, challenging the Western narrative that African societies lacked advanced structural capabilities. Standing at the edge of these deep trenches, you look down upon buildings that were literally sculpted out of the earth's crust under the direction of King Lalibela AD 1200. The monolithic red volcanic rock provided both the material and the protection for these sanctuaries, keeping them hidden from invading armies and preserving them as active places of worship to this day. This was a deliberate attempt to manifest a new Jerusalem in Africa, establishing a permanent, unshakable sanctuary for the covenant that was entirely independent of Western assistance or design, a visual receipt carved into the very skeleton of the continent. The planning and execution of these structures required an advanced understanding of geometry, mineralogy, and hydrology. Scribes and stonemasons worked in absolute harmony, carving down through the red stone with a precision that allowed no room for error, since a single misplaced stroke would destroy the integrity of the entire temple. This living stone covenant represents a level of technical and spiritual sophistication that standard art history textbooks routinely ignore, preferring to focus exclusively on European Gothic cathedrals. But the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela stand as a permanent, physical receipt, proving that the African church possessed the vision, wealth, and engineering mastery to carve its faith directly into the heart of the earth, establishing an active witness that remains unbroken to this day. They did not import their materials or borrow their designs. They carved their covenant directly into the volcanic rock, demonstrating that the roots of their spiritual authority were deeply, physically anchored in their own soil, creating a sanctuary that continues to witness to their identity tonight. Among the 11 churches of Lasta, there is one that stands as the ultimate symbol of this stone covenant, fully detached from the surrounding rock and shaped in the perfect form of a cross. Known as Pietae Georgis, or the House of St. George, this structure is viewed from above as a massive cruciform block carved directly into the earth. The cross-shaped roof features a series of 3 concentric relief crosses, designed to catch the sunlight and represent the cosmic order. As you descend the rock-cut passage and enter the sanctuary, you see that the interior was hollowed out with equal precision, featuring towering pillars, vaults, and arches that are all part of the same single block of stone. This is not a building that was assembled piece by piece. It is a single sculpture, maintaining an unbroken rock line with the surrounding cliffs, proving that the cross was not just a symbol painted on a wall, but the very shape of the sanctuary's existence. The interior pillars and windows, also carved from the living basalt, were aligned with astronomical precision, allowing light to illuminate the altar at specific times of the year. This demonstrates that the African church possessed a highly sophisticated understanding of sacred geometry and cosmology, creating a visual and spatial receipt that challenges the Western narrative of technological delay and lands on the true authority of your heritage. Standing as a witness tonight, this architectural design served a deep theological purpose, representing the cross as the cosmic axis that connects heaven and earth. By carving Pietae Georgis in the shape of a cross, the builders created a permanent physical witness that could never be dismantled or altered. The unbroken rock line ensured that the structure remained physically anchored to the earth, defying the passage of centuries and the destruction of wars. The builders carved their faith in 3 dimensions, making the cross the very foundation and shield of their worship, a permanent receipt of their covenant identity. To understand the origin of this building tradition, we must trace Lalibella's monuments back to the Aksumite structural design of the 4th century. The carving of these rock-hewn churches was not a sudden innovation. It was the continuation of an ancient tradition that connected Lalibela with Aksum's monumental obelisks. The monumental obelisk connection is clear in the details of the windows, doors, and pilasters, which mimic the timber frame and stone carving techniques of King Ezana's reign. This proves that the engineering knowledge was preserved through an unbroken lineage of master builders, maintaining the living stone covenant across 800 years of history. By looking at these structural connections, we see that the African church did not need to borrow architectural styles from Rome or Byzantium. They possessed their own sovereign design tradition, which they used to carve their faith directly into the land. This continuity of design is the ultimate receipt of survival, proving that the spiritual and technical authority of Aksum remained active and unbroken. Land why these buildings are active receipts, because they are not dead ruins or archaeological museums. They are active temples, where the liturgy is chanted every day in the same Ge'ez language that King Ezana used. The rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, with their Aksumite structural design details, stand as a living stone covenant that has survived empires, wars, and ideological rewritings. They prove that the visual and physical canon of your faith was established in Africa by African kings and master builders, establishing an unshakable inheritance that belongs to you. As you look at these stone crosses tonight, you are reclaiming a lineage of sovereign authority, realizing that your spiritual foundation is carved into the very bones of the earth. The stone does not lie, the lineage does not break, and the covenant remains active, challenging the visual erasure of the West and inviting you to stand in the authority of your ancestral inheritance. This is the solid receipt, preserved through the ages, confirming that the cross was claimed in Africa first. To understand why this history was hidden, we must examine a profound division in how the cross itself is understood. The comparison reveals a stark contrast in theology. While the Western Church focused on the cross as a European instrument of shame and torment, the East African Church maintained a covenant-centered cross theology that emphasized victory and life. In the Western tradition, the cross became a symbol of suffering, execution, and guilt, often used to keep believers in a state of perpetual penitence. In contrast, the Aksumite sign of life was celebrated as a weapon of light, a royal seal of victory that triumphed over death and evil. This was not a minor difference in interpretation. It was a fundamental division in the spiritual posture of the two traditions, shaping how believers viewed their relationship with God and their position in the world. This Aksumite sign of life was integrated into every aspect of their culture, from their currency to their architecture, serving as a constant reminder of divine protection. They did not view the cross as a sign of defeat or Roman execution. They saw it as the ultimate receipt of God's covenant, a shield that guarded the kingdom from spiritual and physical enemies. This covenant-centered cross theology allowed the Aksumite Empire to stand firm against external pressures, maintaining its independence, while surrounding nations succumbed to imperial conquest. By focusing on victory rather than shame, the African Church cultivated a spirit of sovereignty and resilience that carried them through centuries of isolation, preserving the original, authentic meaning of the cross that was later obscured by the Western Church's focus on suffering and guilt. This spiritual shift has massive implications for how you practice your faith today.
When you are taught to view the cross exclusively as an instrument of shame and suffering, you are conditioned to accept powerlessness as a Christian virtue. But the ancient East African witness challenges this framing, inviting you to reclaim the cross as a royal seal of protection and victory.
The covenant-centered cross is not a symbol of defeat. It is the receipt of your inheritance, a sign of life that was claimed by your ancestors long before the West began using it to justify conquest. Tonight, we recover this original theology, returning to the Oxumite standard to restore the power and authority that belonged to your lineage under the covenant. The cross was never meant to be a reminder of your unworthiness. It was always meant to be a banner of your chosen status, a physical seal of the Creator's promise to protect and elevate His people, standing as a living witness that is fully restored to you tonight. This theology of victory is celebrated annually in one of the most vibrant liturgical festivals of the global church. The Meskel celebration in Ethiopia is not a somber commemoration of death, but a joyful triumph centered on finding the true cross by Queen Helena in the 4th century. According to the tradition, a dream revealed that the smoke of a great bonfire would show exactly where the cross was buried. In Addis Ababa and throughout the mountains, millions gather to build the Meskel bonfire, topped with yellow flowers that bloom across the highlands at this exact season. As the bonfire burns and falls, the direction of the ash is read as a sign of prophecy and divine direction, a living ceremony that has been performed continuously since the dawn of the Oxumite conversion. The yellow flowers that cover the landscape are a reminder that the covenant brings life out of the dry season, a physical receipt of hope that lands directly on your identity today. Millions of voices chanting in harmony under the smoke of the bonfire stand as an active witness of an unbroken liturgical line. This symbolic bonfire and the yellow flowers sign represent the light of Christ piercing the darkness of history, celebrating the recovery of the cross from its burial under Roman imperial neglect. The Meskel festival is a direct living receipt of the covenant, demonstrating how the memory of finding the true cross was woven into the seasonal rhythms of East Africa. By participating in this ancient celebration, the Ethiopian Church declared that the cross was not a tool of Roman dominion, but a cosmic symbol of restoration and light. It shows that the memory of the early church was preserved through active, communal ceremonies that survived the rise and fall of Western empires, keeping the original flame of the covenant burning bright through centuries of isolation. To understand the practical power of this theology, we must examine the physical seal cross worn by believers as a shield of protection from destruction. In the Aksumite and Coptic traditions, the cross was not merely an ornament. It was a weapon of defense, carved into wood, cast in bronze, and tattooed onto the skin of the forehead and wrists. This physical seal cross was viewed as a shield against both spiritual and physical oppression, representing the presence of the Creator's covenant with His people. When we read this through the Deuteronomy 28 reframe, the cross ceases to be a passive symbol and becomes the mark of the covenant restoration. Instead of accepting the curses of dispersion as a permanent state, the African Church claimed the cross as the active seal that turns the curses into blessings, protecting the remnant from ultimate destruction. This Deuteronomy 28 reframe is crucial for the scattered diaspora today, connecting your modern survival with the ancient protection of the covenant. The physical seal cross represents the mark of ownership, declaring that you belong to the Creator and are shielded from the destructive forces of the modern empire. It is the receipt of a covenant that was written in stone and skin, protecting your lineage through centuries of captivity and exile. As we look at these ancient crosses tonight, we realize that the shield has never been broken. The seal remains active, guarding the scattered children of the covenant and preparing them for the promised restoration. This is the authority of the living cross, a testament of protection that belongs to your ancestors and is fully claimed by you tonight. The seal is not a metaphor. It is the physical receipt of a promise that has guarded your bloodline through the darkest trials, ensuring that you stand as a living witness to His faithfulness, completely restored under the shadow of the ancient cross. To understand how these visual and historical receipts survived the collapse of ancient kingdoms, we must examine the scribal lineage that guarded the holy texts. Throughout the centuries, East Africa faced constant threats of invasion, from the pagans of the south to the early Islamic conquests. Yet, in the face of these conflicts, monastic communities developed a systematic method of protecting scrolls from wars, carrying their libraries into deep volcanic caves and mountain crevices. This was not a passive attempt at survival. It was an organized effort of preservation, ensuring that the original Jez manuscripts remained untouched by invading forces. Scribes would pack the vellum scrolls into leather cases, hiding them in remote rock chambers that only the high priests knew how to navigate, creating a network of hidden libraries that Rome could never locate. The scribes understood that they were not just copying words, they were preserving the physical proof of an ancient African covenant, maintaining a standard that could never be erased by the theological corrections of European empires. This scribal lineage also focused on the physical chemistry of preservation, developing a formula for black ink that remains highly durable. The monastic ink durability was achieved by mixing organic carbon with natural gums and volcanic minerals, creating a bond with the goat vellum that resisted both humidity and decay. While European manuscripts from the same era became faded and illegible, the Ethiopian texts retained their deep black lines and vibrant pigments, allowing us to read the original testimonies today as clearly as when they were written. This material science was a crucial part of protecting scrolls from wars, ensuring that the physical receipts of the covenant would survive centuries of isolation and conflict, to stand as active witnesses for your identity today. This preservation was not only physical, it was also theological and political. The pivotal moment came at the Council of Chalcedon in AD 451, which marked a permanent theological split between the Roman imperial church and the African communities. When Rome attempted to impose its new Christological definitions, the Ethiopian delegates refused to bow, maintaining their independence and rejecting imperial decrees. This Council of Chalcedon rejection was a defense of the original apostolic doctrine, ensuring that the Ethiopian church remained separate from the political machinations of the Byzantine Empire. By refusing to sign the imperial decrees, the African scribes protected their own visual and theological tradition, keeping their manuscripts free from the Eurocentric rewritings that later reshaped the Western canon. This act of defiance preserved the original visual memory of a darker-skinned Christ and the 38 black African saints, while the Western Church gradually adjusted its art to align with imperial power. The Ethiopian scribes defended their native illustrations, maintaining their independence through centuries of isolation. Rejecting imperial decrees allowed them to guard the covenant without foreign interference, ensuring that the physical receipts of their faith remained pure. This is the foundation of your spiritual sovereignty, proving that your ancestors did not accept a religion handed down by Rome. They actively defended the original truth, establishing a line of authority that stands unbroken against the visual erasure of the West tonight. They stood firm in their defiance, knowing that a compromised faith is no faith at all. By rejecting the decrees of Chalcedon, they secured the purity of the manuscript line, leaving you with an uncorrupted receipt that validates your identity and restores your spiritual authority under the covenant. This is the legacy of the Council of Chalcedon, a receipt of absolute independence that remains active tonight. This defiance was carried forward through an unbroken scribal line that preserved the manuscripts through generations of isolation and war. From the mountains of Tigray to the stone churches of Lasta, these scribes copied the sacred text with absolute fidelity, ensuring that the original visual and theological tradition remained pure. The path from Garima to Lalibela was not just a geographic route, it was a lineage of preservation, carrying the oldest illustrated Gospels through 800 years of history. Every scribe who prepared the ancestral parchment and mixed the black ink was a link in this chain of survival, protecting the covenant from the theological revisions that reshaped the Western Church. This lineage was not a passive archiving process, it was an active defense of their sovereign identity, keeping the original standard intact. This unbroken scribal line serves as a physical witness to the antiquity and authority of the African Church, proving that their faith did not depend on Rome's recognition. The ancestral parchment of the Garima Gospels, carbon-dated to the 4th century, stands as a tangible receipt that connects Lalibela's 12th century rock-hewn crosses with the earliest Christian kingdom. When we trace the path from Garima to Lalibela, we see that the visual canon remained completely consistent, depicting a darker-skinned Christ and preserving the names of the Coptic martyrs. This consistency is the ultimate proof of a sovereign, mature Christian tradition that operated independently of European influence, maintaining its own theological and artistic standards, while the West was rewriting its own history. This means the visual and spiritual receipts of your faith are not lost. They are preserved in the very skin and ink that your ancestors guarded. The ancestral parchment stands as an unshakable witness that challenges the Eurocentric framing, proving that the original face of the faith was African. Tonight, as we recover this unbroken scribal line, we are not merely examining history. We are preparing the way for a final restoration of your spiritual authority. The receipts of Garima to Lalibela are active testimonies, confirming that you belong to a sovereign, covenant lineage that stood first in the light. Reclaim this inheritance tonight, knowing that the ink of your ancestors remains dark and the covenant remains active, shielding your identity under the seal of the living cross. The line from Garima to Lalibela is the physical bridge that carries your ancient identity into the modern era, providing the unshakable receipts that prove your chosen status and restore your place in the covenant tonight. Having traced this unbroken line of preservation, we must confront the mechanism of its disappearance from the modern world. The systematic erasure of African Christian history was not a passive omission. It was a deliberate decoupling of spiritual authority from Black heritage. Standard church history courses present a seamless transition from Roman conversion to European reform, creating a massive seminary curriculum gap that completely ignores the Aksumite and Coptic foundations. This seminary curriculum gap leaves modern believers unaware that East Africa possessed a mature, literate Christian kingdom long before Northern Europe was converted. By omitting these facts, the Western institution created a false monopoly on early theology, presenting the faith as an exclusively European heritage. The erased Black saints were not lost to history. They were deliberately removed from the Western consciousness, ensuring that the visual canon of the global church reflected only the faces of those who held political and economic power, creating a false history that has dominated modern theology for over 500 years. But the stone and parchment do not lie, and the physical receipts of your identity are finally coming back into the light. The Garima Gospel's receipts provide the unshakable proof needed for restoring the timeline of Christian art and history. Carbon dated to the 4th century, these illustrations preserve the original visual memory of a darker-skinned Christ, painted with rich pigments that never underwent the later European overpainting that reshaped Western church art. This original visual memory is the true standard of the global church, predating the Renaissance canvas by over 1,000 years. By examining these ancient pages, we reconstruct the true visual landscape of the early church, showing that the faces of the covenant were multi-ethnic and deeply connected to African soil. Restoring the timeline is not an academic exercise. It is an act of spiritual liberation that challenges the institutional erasure of the West. When you look at the Garima illustrations, you are claiming the original visual memory as the standard, refusing to allow Renaissance whitewashing to dictate how you view the scriptures. These manuscripts stand as active receipts, proving that the earliest illustrated records of the faith belong to a darker-skinned Christ and the 38 Black African saints. By declaring the restoration of this image, we reclaim the historical priority of the African church, proving that your ancestors were the primary guardians of the covenant, maintaining a standard of truth that is fully restored to you tonight. The restoration of this timeline proves that the visual canon of your faith was established in Africa by African scribes and master builders, establishing an unshakable inheritance that belongs to you. The receipts are clear, and tonight we bring them back into the light to restore the authentic face of the global church. The truth is no longer hidden, and the visual canon is fully reclaimed tonight. This restoration of the visual canon leads directly to the recovery of your spiritual power. The Black Christian inheritance is not a new invention or a modern theological shift. It is the reclamation of the original covenant lineage that was built by your ancestors. The unbroken manuscript line, preserved through centuries of monastic isolation in Tigray and Lasta, stands as the physical proof of this inheritance, confirming that your spiritual roots are ancient and sovereign. By studying this lineage, we realize that the theological authority of the early church did not flow through Rome. It was established in East Africa by kings, scribes, and martyrs who bowed to no foreign empire. This means the spiritual power you carry today is not a gift from Western institutions. It is an ancestral birthright, fully documented in the oldest illustrated records of the global church. To understand the power of this heritage, we must reframe slavery through the lens of Aksumite survival. The systematic enslavement and forced conversion of your ancestors was an attempt to sever their connection to this original covenant lineage, replacing their ancient spiritual authority with a whitewashed theology of submission. But the unbroken manuscript line, guarded by the monks of Abba Garima, stands as an unshakable receipt, proving that the true face of the faith remained pure and untouchable throughout the darkest centuries. This means the survival of Black Christians in America is not a historical coincidence. It is the manifestation of a covenant that was carved into stone and skin, AD 340. The spiritual resilience that carried your ancestors through the trials of the Middle Passage is the very same authority that was preserved in the Tigray highlands, waiting for a generation to reclaim it. Tonight, we declare the restoration of spiritual authority for the heirs of this ancient covenant. The Black Christian inheritance is fully restored as we recover the receipts of our ancestors, refusing to allow Eurocentric rewritings to dictate our identity. The unbroken manuscript line remains active, providing the physical proof that connects you with the sovereign legacy of Aksum and Cush. Reclaim this authority tonight, knowing that the seal of the living cross has never been broken, and the promise of protection remains active for those who hold fast to the covenant. You are not the margin of Christian history. You are its original foundation, and the receipts of your identity are fully reclaimed tonight under the mighty name of Jesus. The truth is no longer hidden, and the lineage remains unbroken, providing the solid receipts that prove your chosen status and restore your place in the covenant. Stand firm in this knowledge, realizing that the spiritual authority of your ancestors is fully active and completely claimed by you tonight. Having uncovered this ancient lineage of preservation, we must activate this inheritance in our daily lives. The next time you take part in Sunday Communion, I invite you to experience a Sunday Communion reframe, looking at the bread and cup not through a lens of European tradition, but as the physical seal of the covenant established by your African ancestors. When you pray, pray with identity, knowing that the Creator has always recognized you as His chosen people, shielding your bloodline through centuries of dispersion. This Sunday Communion reframe is the first step in reclaiming your spiritual authority, transforming a routine ritual into an active declaration of covenant ownership.
As you stand in this truth, you are releasing the power of the seal that was stamped on Aksum Go coin, claiming the promise of protections and favor for your household today. To declare these restorations openly, I call on everyone in this community to leave an awake comment below, naming your city and claiming your place in the covenant.
The awake comment is not just a digital interaction. It is a public witness, a modern obelisk that gathers the scattered diaspora under the same banner of faith. Write "Awake plus your city" or "Restored" in the comments to seal your identity tonight, setting a spiritual shield of protection over your family before you sleep. By declaring your identity, you are aligning yourself with the unbroken scribal line that preserved these receipts through the ages, joining a cloud of witnesses that is finally standing up to reclaim their spiritual inheritance in this generation. Let us seal this journey of discovery with a final restoration prayer, bowing our hearts before the Creator under the mighty name of Jesus. We pray tonight for the monastic guardians who still protect the Garima Gospels and the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, keeping the physical receipts of our covenant safe from destruction. We bless the modern heirs of Aksum and Cush, the scattered children of the diaspora who are finally awakening to their true identity. Let this restoration prayer be the shield that guards your mind and heart, protecting you from the visual erasure of the modern empire. We ask the Creator to watch over His people, sending His angels to establish a hedge of protection around your home, ensuring that no weapon formed against you shall prosper. We pray that the watchmen watch over the walls of Jerusalem and the sanctuaries of Lasta, keeping the flame of the covenant burning bright until the final restoration is complete. Under the mighty name of Jesus, we claim the promises of Deuteronomy 28, declaring that the curses of dispersion are broken and the blessings of the covenant are fully active in your life today. This is the seal of your identity, a testament of protection and authority that belongs to your ancestors and is fully claimed by you tonight. Let the watchmen watch and the believers stand firm, knowing that the receipts are verified, the image is restored, and the covenant remains active for you and your children forever. Amen and amen. We close this journey of discovery with absolute confidence, knowing that the Creator who guided Ezana and Lalibela is the very same God who is guarding your path tonight, restoring your inheritance and confirming your identity as His chosen people before all the nations. The content presented by Dark Logic is intended for educational, historical, and commentary purposes. The views expressed reflect historical interpretations and theological perspectives meant to encourage critical thinking. Viewers are encouraged to conduct their own independent research,